At the very top floor of the Obsidian, the lights were dim behind black glass, and a VIP room was holding a sealed meeting, with the most dangerous faces in Memphis gathered inside. Out in the corridor, a thin, small girl with light brown hair was mopping the floor, her hands flushed red from chemicals. Her gray uniform faded from being washed too many times. In her ears, her son's voice from earlier that afternoon was still echoing. "Mom, come home early." She scrubbed faster. The night shift was almost over. All she wanted was to go home. Then, from inside the VIP room, shouting suddenly flared. Glass shattered with a clattering crash. The door burst open. A man lunged out, eyes bloodshot, sweat pouring down his face, a gun in his hand. He spun back and aimed straight at the man standing at the head of the room. "You stole everything from me. My wife left. My child won't even look at me. Now I'm taking your life." The man with the gun trained on him didn't step back. He didn't tremble. He stood there, cold as stone, eyes dark, a faint scar along the bridge of his nose. "Shoot," he said. "You think I'm afraid of dying?" The gunman chambered around. The bodyguards were too far away. The man had already been shot in the right arm and was slumped on the floor. No one could reach him in time. No one, except the girl with the mop who was standing right outside the door. She saw everything, her hand clenched around the mop handle. Her heart pounded hard, but in her mind, it wasn't fear. In her mind was the image of a man dying in her arms in the Afghanistan desert, his blood soaking into her uniform, his eyes closing, and she hadn't been able to save him. This time was different. This time she could. She lunged in without thinking and swung the mop handle into the gunman's hand. The gun jerked off target, but he squeezed the trigger. Bang. The bullet tore into her abdomen. She collapsed onto the black stone floor. Blood spread fast, soaking through her gray uniform. Security rushed in and slammed the attacker to the ground. The gun flew away. The man with the scar on his nose dropped to his knees beside her, his hand pressing down on her wound, warm blood sticking to his fingers. "Why? Why did you do that?" The girl's eyes were already dimming as she looked at him. "Because someone has to." From her pocket fell a small photo. A 7-year-old boy with brown curls, grinning wide, holding a messy crayon drawing of two people, one big and one small. Beneath it, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Mom is the strongest." And on her wrist was a braided old string bracelet, the thread faded, nearly broken, but still there. The man stared at the bracelet. His whole body went rigid, his face drained pale. He knew that bracelet. He had one exactly like it in the desk drawer 10 meters away. He'd kept it for 22 years. But her eyes had closed. Blood was still flowing, and he didn't understand why his heart was breaking for someone he had never seen. "Call an ambulance now." His voice shook. For the first time in 24 years, Priest lay on the floor, his shoulder still oozing blood, watching his boss, a man he had never seen, shake like that before. Who is that girl? Why would she risk her life to save a Mafia boss? And the worn, braided string bracelet on her wrist. Why did it make a man who didn't fear death suddenly feel fear? If you believe that real heroes don't need anyone to know their names, please like and share this story with the people who need to hear it. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part. The girl was lying on the operating table, the bullet having nearly struck her liver. 6 months earlier, she had been nothing more than a single mother trying to survive. Josie Wren, 32 years old, light brown hair, blue-gray eyes, a beautiful face that always looked tired. She lived in a tiny studio apartment in South Memphis, the walls damp and stained with spreading watermarks, the summer heat scorching, the winter wind slipping through the cracks in the door. Yet the apartment was always clean, because Josie kept everything spotless even when her life was not. Every morning was the same. She woke at 5 o'clock and made breakfast for Benji, her 7-year-old son with brown curls and wide eyes that asked questions that sometimes left her unable to answer. He sat at the small table, his feet not touching the floor, eating a bowl of cheap cereal she'd bought on sale at the dollar store. At 6 o'clock, she took Benji to school, kissed his forehead, then hurried to the small hotel where she worked the day shift, cleaning rooms, making beds, changing towels, her hands flushed red from harsh chemicals. The manager was a heavy man with a red face who often shouted at her for working too slowly. Josie lowered her head and apologized, not because she was weak, but because she couldn't afford to lose this job. At noon, she sat in the staff room and opened her lunchbox. Inside was a sandwich. She cut it in half, ate one portion, and carefully wrapped the other half for Benji's dinner. At 4 in the afternoon, she picked her son up, cooked, bathed him, told him stories, then tucked Benji into bed. The boy held her hand and wouldn't let go. "Mom, you're a superhero." Josie smiled. "I'm just a cleaner, sweetheart." Benji shook his head. "No, you save people. My teacher said so. She told us about soldiers who save lives. You're a soldier too, aren't you?" Josie swallowed her tears and kissed his forehead. "Go to sleep, my son." At 6 in the evening, Mrs. Adler, the neighbor, 68 years old, silver-haired and slightly bent but with eyes that were always warm, knocked on the door. She cared for Josie like a daughter, and was the only person who knew Josie had once been a soldier. "My girl, you can't live like this forever." Josie put on her gray uniform, faded from being washed too many times. "As long as Benji is healthy, I can endure everything else." Mrs. Adler looked at her, shook her head, and sighed. Josie kissed Benji once more and stepped outside. The Memphis night closed in, cold and dark. She took 2 buses to the Obsidian, the largest nightclub in the city, where she worked the night shift from 7 o'clock until 3 in the morning. On her left wrist, she always wore an old braided string bracelet. The thread faded and nearly broken, but she never took it off. Benji once asked why she didn't throw it away. "It's ugly." Josie stroked his hair. "Your grandmother gave it to me. I'll never take it off." She didn't say more. She didn't explain. That bracelet was the only thing left of her mother, of another life, of another Josie. At the Obsidian, she had a tiny janitor's locker. Inside, she taped a picture of Benji grinning wide, holding a messy drawing of 2 figures, one big and one small. Beneath it, a child's handwriting that read, "Mom and me. Mom is the strongest." Next to the photo was a small folded letter, the paper yellowed, the creases worn thin from being opened and folded too many times. Every night before starting her shift, Josie opened that letter and read the slanted handwriting of a man, the lines slightly unsteady from being written under the light of a tent lamp in the desert. "If I don't come back, live for our son and never stop saving people, Josie. That's the most beautiful thing about you. I'll love you forever." When she finished reading, she folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of her uniform, right beside her heart. Then she picked up her mop and stepped into the dark hallway. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She'd cried enough. Now she simply worked. Who wrote that letter? A soldier, a husband, a father who never returned. And his story was the reason Josie had become the woman she was today. While Josie read her husband's letter each night before her shift, just several floors above her, a completely different man sat in the dark. Dominic Ashford, 36 years old. Tall, black hair, eyes dark as the bottom of a well. A faint scar along the bridge of his nose from a life he never spoke about to anyone. He sat in the top-floor VIP room of the Obsidian, a glass of whiskey before him untouched, simply sitting there, looking out over the city of Memphis through the blackened glass. The Obsidian wasn't only the largest nightclub in the city, it was the heart of an underground empire. Gambling, loans, protection, and things the neon lights never reached. Dominic controlled it all. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. He only had to look, and people understood. There was a sentence he often said, "Mercy is a luxury the dead don't need." No one knew where that sentence came from. No one dared to ask. Priest, his right hand, 45 years old, quiet, absolutely loyal, was the only one allowed to sit at the same table with Dominic, without being invited. The rest of the world stood or knelt. Dominic had one rule. Anyone who violated it didn't need a trial. Never touch women or children. That was his iron law. It was the only thing he placed above money and power. People thought he created that rule to appear moral in an immoral world. They were wrong. That rule came from blood, from tears, from a night when Dominic was 12 years old and his world collapsed. His mother's name was Mary Ashford, a small, gentle woman with sad eyes and a smile that always tried to say everything was fine even when nothing ever was. His father was a violent drunk. By day he was a mechanic. By night he was a demon. He beat Dominic's mother every night. Her cries pierced through the thin walls. Dominic lay curled on his bed, pressing a pillow over his ears, but he still heard. He heard every sound. His mother hid bruises beneath long sleeves, hid swollen eyes behind sunglasses, hid pain behind a smile when she looked at her son. "I'm fine. Don't worry. I just fell." Dominic knew she was lying. but he was 12 years old. He didn't know what to do. Then one November night, cold and bitter, his father came home drunker than usual, eyes bloodshot, a broken bottle in his hand. Dominic heard shouting, crashing, his mother crying. He ran from his room and stood at the doorway, looking in. His father was pinning his mother to the kitchen floor. The broken bottle was driven into her neck. There was so much blood, more than Dominic had ever seen in his life. He screamed. "Mom!" The scream tore through that night. But his father didn't stop, and his mother never rose again. Dominic's scream was the last sound she heard in her life. The police came. His father was arrested. Dominic was taken to an orphanage, but he didn't stay. He climbed the wall and ran away the very first night. He didn't want anyone deciding his life anymore. No one. At 12 years old, Dominic Ashford lived alone on the streets of Memphis, sleeping under bridges, eating leftovers from trash cans, fighting older boys to keep a place to sleep. He learned one thing on the streets. No one saves anyone. The weak die. The strong survive. He chose to be strong. 2 years on the streets turned the 12-year-old boy into something else. No longer afraid. No longer crying. No longer trusting anyone. Then one night when he was 14, he was caught in a gang fight. Not because he wanted to be, but because he was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. A blade drove into his abdomen. He fell in a dark alley, his back against wet brick, blood seeping through the fingers pressed against his wound. But he couldn't stop it. He looked up at the Memphis night sky. There were no stars, only the sickly yellow glow of a streetlight, and he thought, "This is when I die." He was 14 years old and about to die alone in an alley, just as his mother had died alone on a kitchen floor. Then he heard footsteps. Running. Urgent. A figure appeared at the mouth of the alley. A woman with brown hair and worried eyes knelt beside him. She pressed her hand firmly against his wound, her voice trembling but her hands steady. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Beside her was a little girl, about 10 years old. Blue-gray eyes, light brown hair, frightened but not running away. She stood there looking at him. Then she knelt down and took his hand. The 10-year-old girl who held the hand of the bleeding street boy in that alley that night was Josie. But to understand why a 10-year-old child was in a dark alley in South Memphis, instead of lying in her bed asleep, we have to go back to the beginning, to the woman kneeling beside her that night, her mother, Helen Wren. Helen was a nurse, but not the kind who sat in a brightly lit clinic with humming air conditioning. She was a volunteer nurse in the places no one wanted to go, the poorest parts of Memphis, where gunshots were more common than laughter, where people died because they couldn't afford antibiotics. She opened a tiny free clinic in South Memphis. 4 aging walls, a rusted examination table, a few boxes of donated medicine. She worked there every evening after her regular shift at the hospital, unpaid, not because anyone forced her, but because she wanted to, and she often brought little Josie with her. "Sit here and draw, sweetheart. When I finish examining patients, we'll go home." Josie grew up among wounds, among the smell of antiseptic, among the groans of people who'd been stabbed, beaten, abandoned. She watched her mother save lives every night and believed that was the most ordinary thing in the world. That night in the alley was no different. Helen was on her way home after her shift when she heard a moan from the darkness. She ran in without hesitation. Josie ran after her, unafraid because her mother was there, and her mother always knew what to do. But 3 years later, her mother wasn't there anymore. When Josie was 13, one June night, Helen was on duty at the free clinic when 2 men burst in to steal medicine and money. She had no money, only cheap medicine and bandages. But they didn't believe her. A gunshot rang out. Helen fell to the clinic floor, blood spreading across the white tiles. She died in the place where she had saved others. Josie was at home when the phone rang. She picked it up and heard a stranger's voice, speaking words she couldn't understand, couldn't accept. Her mother was gone. She was 13 years old, with no father, no relatives. She was placed into the foster care system. 3 families in 5 years. Nowhere was home. No one truly loved her. She learned how not to cry in front of others, how to wash her own clothes, how to eat less so she wouldn't be a burden. She grew hard, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. At 18, she left foster care and did the only thing that made sense to her. She enlisted. She joined the army and became a combat medic like her mother, saving lives, but this time on a battlefield. In the military, she met Ryan Wren, an infantry soldier, tall, short hair, quick to smile, always telling terrible jokes that somehow still made her laugh. He was the first light she'd seen after 5 years in darkness. They fell in love. They married. Josie was 24. Ryan was 26. A small wedding on base. No family, no guests, just the two of them and a promise. I'll always stand beside you. 1 year later, Benji was born. Josie held her son and looked into his wide eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she cried from happiness. But war doesn't let anyone keep happiness for long. In 2019, their unit was deployed to Afghanistan. Ryan and Josie were stationed together. Benji stayed behind with a fellow soldier's family. On March 14th, a patrol convoy was ambushed. An explosion. Vehicles on fire. Josie heard the shouting, the gunfire. Her medic instincts ignited. She ran into the gunfire and dragged 2 fellow soldiers out of a burning armored vehicle. She was wounded in the leg but didn't stop. She went back for Ryan. He was in the front seat. Shrapnel had pierced his chest. There was too much blood. She pulled him out and laid him on the sand, pressing her hands against the wound. But she knew. She was a medic. She knew that wound couldn't be saved. Ryan looked at her, his eyes fading. He took her hand and said one sentence. "Take care of our son for me." Then his eyes closed. Josie held her husband's body for 40 minutes in the desert under the blazing sun, his blood soaking into her uniform. Gunfire still erupted around her, but she heard nothing. She was awarded the Bronze Star for bravery under fire, but she didn't want a medal. She wanted her husband. She returned to America with PTSD, nightmares every night, her hands shaking at the sound of loud explosions. Her husband's family blamed her. "You were a medic and you couldn't save your own husband." They cut off contact. They refused to see Benji. Her nursing license expired. She didn't have the money to renew it. No one wanted to hire a female veteran with PTSD. She lost everything except 2 things: Benji and the braided string bracelet on her wrist. She didn't know that bracelet was tying her to someone she had never seen again. Back to that alley that night. Dominic was 14 years old, lying on the cold ground, his back against a brick wall, blood slipping through the fingers pressed against the stab wound in his abdomen, unable to stop it. He was about to let go when the woman appeared. Helen Wren knelt beside him, her hand pressing firmly against the wound. Exactly the right place. Exactly the right pressure. Steady, unshaken. She was a nurse. She knew what she was doing. "Son, look at me. Don't close your eyes, do you hear me?" Dominic looked at her. His vision was fading, but he saw her eyes. Warm. Not pity, but something he hadn't seen since his mother died. Genuine care. Then he felt a small hand take his. A tiny hand, slender fingers, but holding tightly. He turned his head and saw a little girl, about 10 years old, light brown hair, blue-gray eyes, kneeling beside him. She was afraid. He could see her eyes were wet. But she didn't run. She didn't pull her hand away. She held tighter and said, "Don't be afraid. My mom will save you." Her voice trembled, but her words did not. Dominic gripped that hand as if gripping life itself. He felt on her wrist a braided string bracelet. It brushed against his palm. Fragile, warm, real. The sound of an ambulance siren rose in the distance. Helen kept pressing on the wound, holding him there, holding him in this world. She shouted to someone at the mouth of the alley, "Hurry, he's losing blood." The ambulance arrived. 2 paramedics ran in and placed Dominic onto a stretcher. As they lifted him, the little girl's hand slipped away. The braided string bracelet on her wrist loosened and fell, landing in Dominic's palm. He closed his fist around it by instinct. Then the stretcher was pushed into the ambulance. The doors shut. Through the small window, he looked out one last time. The woman stood there, his blood on her hands. The little girl stood beside her, holding her mother's hand. The 2 of them grew smaller and disappeared around the corner. Dominic never knew their names. He asked at the hospital. He asked the police. He asked anyone who might know. No one did. They had come like ghosts, saved him, and vanished. He was left with only one thing: the small braided bracelet, its colored thread already beginning to fade, resting in the palm of a 14-year-old boy. He kept it from that day forward. Not a single day did he let it go. After he left the hospital, Dominic returned to the streets, but he was different. He no longer wanted to die. He wanted to live, because someone had held him back. 3 months later, a man came looking for him. Frank Moretti, the oldest crime boss in Memphis. Silver hair, sharp eyes, a voice low as gravel. He looked at Dominic and saw something in the street boy's eyes. Not fear, not anger, but the cold determination of a child who had seen death too many times. He took Dominic in and taught him everything: how to control, how to command, how to build power, and how never to let anyone see weakness. Dominic learned quickly. 10 years later, Frank died. Dominic inherited everything. At 36, he was the boss of Memphis, cold, ruthless, trusting no one. But every late night, when the Obsidian had closed, when Priest had gone home, when the city slept, Dominic sat alone in his office. He opened his desk drawer. Inside were two things: a photograph of his mother, Mary, her sad smile, her dark hair, and the braided string bracelet, its thread almost completely faded but still intact, unbroken. He would lift the bracelet and stare at it for a long time, then place it back and close the drawer, as he did every night. Beside the bracelet was a small slip of paper in his own handwriting, thick black ink. I owe that woman and her daughter one life. For 22 years he searched for them. For 22 years he didn't forget. But Memphis is a wide city, and the two figures in that alley left behind no trace except the fragile bracelet in the drawer of a Mafia boss. Yet Memphis wasn't at peace. Ray Caldwell, 41 years old, Dominic's former lieutenant, had been cast out 3 months earlier for betrayal, for selling information to the enemy. Dominic took everything from him: money, house, reputation. Stripped him clean. Ray was thrown onto the street in humiliation before everyone. He knelt on the pavement, eyes bloodshot, shouting, "I'll be back, Ashford. Remember my words." And on the east side of the city, Victor Sheldon, 52 years old, a seasoned and ruthless rival boss, was watching, waiting for Dominic to slip. Priest warned him that Victor was gathering forces. Ray had disappeared. No one knew where he was. 2 threats at once, boss. Dominic looked at Priest with cold indifference. Ray is a stray dog, not worth worrying about. Victor doesn't dare. He brushed it aside like dust from his shoulder. He didn't know he was wrong. He also didn't know something else. Something more important than every threat in the world. The little girl from that night. The 10-year-old who held his hand in the alley and said, "Don't be afraid. My mom will save you." The girl he had searched for 22 years was now wearing a faded gray uniform, pushing a mop cart down the hallway of the floor below, directly beneath his feet, every single night. 2 people living in the same building every night, yet in 2 completely different worlds. One sat at the top in the darkness of power. One knelt at the bottom in the darkness of a mop handle, and both were lonely in ways no one could see. Every morning was the same. Josie woke before Benji, made breakfast, set it on the table, then gently woke her son. One Tuesday morning, Benji sat eating cereal and looking out the window. Across the street stood a large white house with a wide yard and beautiful cars parked in front. The boy stared at it, then turned to his mother. "Mom, why are we poor?" Josie was pouring milk. Her hand stopped. She set the carton down and sat beside him. "We're not poor. We have each other." But Benji didn't accept that answer. "Tommy in my class has his own room. He has a game console. He has a dad and a mom. Why don't I?" Josie pulled her son into her arms. She didn't know what to say, because she didn't have any answer that wouldn't choke her. She kissed his hair, took him to school, then hurried to the hotel for her morning shift. The red-faced manager was particularly irritable that day. Room 312. The guest complained there was hair on the pillow. "Clean it again. Clean it properly." "I don't pay you to dirty my guest's room." Josie lowered her head. "Yes, sir." She cleaned the room a second time, even though she knew the hair wasn't hers. At noon, she sat in the staff room, opened her lunchbox, cut her sandwich in half, ate one portion slowly, drank water to feel full, wrapped the other half in paper, and slipped it into her bag. 4 o'clock, she picked up Benji. 5 o'clock, she cooked. 6 o'clock, Mrs. Adler came by. 7 o'clock, Josie stepped into the Obsidian and began her night shift. At the Obsidian, Josie had learned the first and most important rule of survival. Be invisible. Don't look at anyone. Don't speak to anyone. Don't hear anything. Don't know anything. She was a ghost in a gray uniform pushing a mop cart through dark hallways where conversations she wasn't meant to hear happened every night. She cleaned floors, picked up broken glasses, wiped away blood when fights broke out in the club. She cleaned it and forgot it. That was how she survived. But her medic instincts never turned off, even if she wanted them to. Her eyes still scanned every corner of a room. She could still tell who carried a gun beneath a jacket. She still noted the nearest exit. She still counted the steps from where she stood to the door. She still assessed threats within the first 3 seconds of entering a space. She didn't want to be that way, but the battlefield had carved those things into her bones. Then one Thursday night, around 11 o'clock, Josie was taking out the trash at the back door of the club. She pushed open the iron door and stepped into the narrow alley behind the building when she heard the sound of fists, groans, a body hitting the ground. She saw 3 large men dressed in black, beating someone lying curled on the pavement, arms over his head, blood flowing from his nose and mouth. She recognized the 3 men as Dominic's subordinates. She had seen them moving through the club, cold faces, hard eyes. The medic inside her flared to life. Her feet stepped forward once, twice. She wanted to run out, pull the man up, shout stop, press her hands against his wounds the way she had on the battlefield, the way her mother had in an alley 22 years ago. But she stopped. The 3rd step never came, because she knew intervening here meant death. This wasn't a battlefield where comrades would cover her. This was Mafia territory. She was only a cleaner. She was no one. She turned her back, walked inside, and shut the iron door. The sounds of punches still echoed through the metal. She leaned against the wall, her hands shaking. Shaking not from PTSD, but because she had just betrayed herself. She was someone who saved people. That was her instinct, her soul, her mother's legacy, her promise to Ryan. And she had walked away. That night she returned home at 3 a.m. Benji was asleep. Mrs. Adler had gone home. Josie lay down beside her son and held him close, listening to his steady breathing. She closed her eyes but couldn't sleep. In her mind was the image of the man curled on the pavement and the 3 men beating him and herself turning away. What kind of people am I working for? She asked in the dark. What kind of people am I feeding my son with their money? But she had no answer, because the answer would force her to quit, and quitting meant Benji wouldn't eat. She lay there holding her child, eyes open in the darkness. Then she remembered something. Every night, around 2 a.m, when she cleaned the hallway near Dominic's office, on the upper floor, she heard piano music, very soft, something sad, very slow. She didn't know the name of the piece, but she knew the person playing was playing for himself, not for anyone else. That night, when she reached the hallway, the piano drifted through the door. She stopped and stood outside, her hand resting on the mop handle, listening to the sorrowful melody passing through the thick wooden door. She stood there longer than usual, because tonight she needed to hear something that wasn't the sound of fists, wasn't the sound of groaning. Inside, Dominic was playing the piano alone in the dark. Then he stopped, because he heard the sound of the mop cart pause outside his door. He knew someone was standing there listening. He didn't open the door. She didn't knock. 2 lonely people separated by a wall. But now Josie knew that wall was stained with blood. That morning the Memphis sky was a rare, flawless blue, as if the city were trying to look beautiful one last time before everything fell apart. Josie woke at 5 o'clock as she did every day, and made breakfast for Benji. But today he was awake earlier than usual. He was already dressed in a white shirt and small dress pants, his brown curls carefully combed, standing in the kitchen with bright eyes and a wide grin. "Mom, today I'm in the school play. I'm a firefighter." Josie knelt and adjusted his collar. "A firefighter, huh? You look so handsome." Benji took her hand. "You'll come watch, right? It's tonight at 7 o'clock. My teacher said both parents can come. I only have you, but you're worth 10 people." Josie held him tightly, her heart tightening in her chest. "I'll be there, I promise." She promised with her whole heart, because she knew Benji had no father, no grandparents, no one but her. If she didn't come, the row of seats for his family would be empty, and he would stare at that empty space the entire performance. She took him to school, kissed his forehead, watched him run through the gates, his white shirt shining in the morning sun. Then she went to her day shift at the hotel and cleaned 12 rooms faster than usual, because today she had to finish everything early. At 4 o'clock, she picked up Benji, fed him early, and left him with Mrs. Adler. "Mrs. Adler, I have to go to work a little early today, but I'll ask to leave early so I can be at Benji's play at 7. Mrs. Adler nodded. "Go on. I'll watch the boy." Josie kissed Benji again. "I'll be there. Remember that." Benji nodded hard and waved as she stepped outside and caught the bus to the Obsidian at 5 in the evening, 2 hours earlier than her normal shift. She planned to clean the upper floor as quickly as possible and then asked to leave early. But when she stepped inside, she immediately knew something wasn't right. The air inside the building was thick with tension. Security moved more than usual. Every face looked cold, rigid. The bartenders whispered among themselves. As Josie passed, she caught a few words. Ray Caldwell has shown up again. Someone saw him downtown this morning. Josie didn't know who Ray Caldwell was. She knew nothing about the world above the floors she cleaned. She only knew how to mop, collect her pay, and go home. But she could feel the tension. Her medic instincts flickered on, the way they always had before something happened in Afghanistan. The air changes before gunfire. It's always like that. She worked faster, checking the clock again and again. 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock. She pictured Benji in his firefighter costume standing behind the curtain, waiting his turn, his eyes surely scanning the seats looking for his mother. 7:15. Josie was almost finished with the upper floor. Only the hallway outside the VIP room left. 7:30. She pushed the mop cart along the dark corridor. Almost done. Just 15 more minutes, and she would run out to catch the bus to the school and see her son perform. 7:45. She was wringing out the mop when she heard fast, heavy, urgent footsteps in the hallway. She looked up. A man was striding straight toward the VIP room, eyes bloodshot, sweat running down his forehead, his jacket bulging unnaturally at the side. His steps were not the steps of someone coming to talk. They were the steps of someone coming to end something. Josie stepped forward and blocked the hallway. I'm sorry, you're not allowed up here. He didn't stop, didn't look at her. Move. He shoved her hard. She staggered but didn't fall. And in that instant when he pushed her aside, his jacket opened slightly, and she saw the grip of a gun tucked into his waistband. Her heart skipped once, then began pounding fast and hard. She knew that shape. She had seen more guns than anyone else in that building. He walked straight into the VIP room. She heard him kick the door, heard shouting, heard the first gunshot, heard Priest groan, heard the man screaming at Dominic, and in the next 40 seconds, everything in Josie's mind spun. She saw Ryan lying on the sand, blood soaking his uniform, his eyes closing. She hadn't been able to save him. She heard Benji's voice. Mom, you're a superhero. She heard Ryan's words in the letter. Never stop saving people, Josie. That's the most beautiful thing about you. She saw her mother kneeling in an alley, hands pressed against the wound of a stranger. She remembered the Thursday night she had turned away and left a man being beaten in an alley, and how she hadn't slept at all afterward. 40 seconds. She gripped the mop handle tight. This time she didn't turn away. This time she was in time. She ran in. And the rest you already know. Hospital lights bright and cold. A heart monitor beating steadily. Beep, beep, beep. The hallway silent. The smell of antiseptic. Dominic Ashford sitting in a plastic chair in the waiting room. His black suit stained with blood. His hands stained with blood. Not his blood. The blood of the cleaning woman he had never truly seen. Josie was rushed into emergency surgery at 8:14 in the evening. The bullet had pierced her abdomen and lodged less than 2 centimeters from her liver. The doctor said she was lucky, but no one in the waiting room felt lucky. Dominic sat on a hard plastic chair, his back straight, his hands resting on his thighs. His hands were stained with blood. Her blood. It had dried into a dark brown on his fingers, but he didn't wash it off. He didn't leave his seat. He didn't speak. His black suit was soaked, the blood spreading from his chest down to his abdomen because he had caught her when she fell. He had pressed his hand against her wound while waiting for the ambulance. He had shouted orders to call doctors. For the first time in his life, Dominic Ashford had lost control. Priest sat beside him, his right shoulder wrapped in white bandage, because Ray's first bullet had torn through it, but Priest didn't care about his own wound. He was watching his boss, because he had never seen Dominic like this. Silent, eyes fixed on a single point on the wall without blinking. Boss, go home. She's just a cleaner. The doctors will handle it. Dominic didn't turn his head, didn't look at Priest. In his right hand he held something small, Benji's photograph. The picture had fallen from Josie's pocket when she collapsed on the floor of the Obsidian. A 7-year-old boy with brown curls grinning wide, holding a drawing that said, Mom is the strongest. She has a child. Priest fell silent. She has a 7-year-old child and she still ran in. His voice was lower than usual, rougher. She knew she could die and she still ran in. Priest said nothing, because he knew Dominic didn't need an answer. He was speaking to himself. Then Dominic looked down at her left wrist. When he had held Josie on the floor, he had seen it there. The old braided string bracelet, the thread faded and nearly broken. His heart had skipped a beat, because he knew that bracelet. He had touched it 22 years earlier in a dark alley when a little girl held his hand. "Priest," Dominic said, his voice slow, each word clear. "Go to the Obsidian. Open my desk drawer. Inside there is a small braided string bracelet. Bring it here." Priest looked at him in surprise but didn't ask questions. 20 years working for Dominic had taught him one thing. When the boss gave an order in that voice, you obey. You don't ask. Priest stood up, his shoulder aching, and walked quickly. 40 minutes later, he returned, holding a small bag. Inside was the bracelet from Dominic's desk drawer, the bracelet he had kept for 22 years. Dominic took it in his left hand. Then he took the bracelet that the nurse had removed from Josie's wrist before surgery and held it in his right. He placed the two bracelets side by side on his open palm, the same braid, 3 strands twisted together, the same color thread faded from deep blue to a pale gray blue, the same size, the same wear of time. 22 years. A pair. 2 bracelets made as one pair. Not coincidence, not accident. These 2 bracelets had been made by the same hands, worn by 2 people from the same family. Dominic's hands began to tremble. Not from cold, not from fear, but from something rising deep inside him, a tremor from the core of his body, as a truth too large, pushed upward from his stomach to his chest to his throat. Priest looked at the 2 bracelets resting in his boss's palm, then at Dominic's face. His face was pale, his eyes red. "Boss, what is this?" Dominic didn't answer. He couldn't, because if he opened his mouth now, he would break. And Dominic Ashford was never allowed to break in front of anyone. But his hands were shaking. He closed his fingers around the bracelets, then reached for the patient chart on the small table nearby, Josie's chart. He opened it and began to read. Dominic opened the file. On the first page was the basic information. Name, Josie Wren. Age, 32. Occupation, janitor. Marital status, widowed. Emergency contact, Benji Wren, son, 7 years old. Address, a studio apartment in South Memphis. Bank account balance, $211. Dominic read that number twice. $211. She had $211 in her account, and she ran into a bullet for a man she didn't know. His jaw tightened, his teeth grinding together. Priest stood beside him, silent, watching his boss read. Dominic turned to the next page, and everything began to change. The second layer, military service history, United States Army, specialty, combat medic. Enlisted in 2015, discharged in 2019. Stationed in Afghanistan. Decorations, Bronze Star for Valor. Dominic sat up straighter. She's a veteran. His voice wasn't a question. It was shock. The thin, cleaning woman he had never truly seen was a decorated battlefield medic. Priest leaned closer to read. Bronze Star, boss. That's not a participation medal. That's for people who almost die saving someone else. Dominic turned another page. The third layer, a report from her commanding officer attached to her medical file. March 14th, 2019. Patrol convoy ambushed in Helmand Province. Private Josie Wren exited a secured position under enemy fire, approached a burning armored vehicle, and extracted 2 wounded soldiers. She sustained a leg injury during the rescue, but refused evacuation until both soldiers were transported to medical care. Her actions saved 2 lives and demonstrated extraordinary courage, consistent with the highest traditions of the United States Army. Dominic finished reading and lowered the file to his lap. He looked through the glass of the intensive care room where Josie lay unmoving, wires across her body, the heart monitor sounding steadily. That small woman ran into fire to pull her comrades out. She saves people. It's instinct, not the first time, not an accident. That's who she is. Then he looked down at the 2 braided bracelets, still resting on his lap. Same braid, same faded color, same wear of time, and in his mind a thought began to form, slowly, like a small flame catching. He lifted the file again and turned to the family information page. Mother, Helen Wren. Occupation, nurse. Status, deceased. Helen Wren. Dominic read the name once. Then again, Helen Wren. He looked at the bracelets, looked at the name, looked back at the bracelets, and everything crashed over him like a tidal wave. 22 years ago. A dark alley in South Memphis. He was 14, bleeding on the ground. A woman kneeling beside him, pressing her hand against his wound. Son, don't be afraid. I'm here. And a 10-year-old girl with light brown hair and blue-gray eyes holding his hand. Don't be afraid. My mom will save you. My mom. Helen Wren was that mother. The little girl was Josie. The 2 bracelets were a pair. The one in his drawer was the one that slipped from her wrist that night. The other was the one Josie had worn for 22 years. Not a grandmother's gift. A mother's. Helen had made them as a pair for herself and her daughter. And the 10-year-old girl who held his hand in that alley and kept him in this world was now lying in intensive care with a bullet in her abdomen because she had done the same thing again. Saved him. Dominic Ashford, the boss of Memphis. The man who feared no one, who hadn't cried in 24 years since the night his mother died, felt tears run down his face, down his scarred cheek, over the faint scar on his nose, down to his hands, falling onto the 2 braided bracelets. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't hide them. He just sat there and let them fall. Priest stood beside him, 20 years following Dominic through blood, through fire, through street wars, and he had never seen his boss cry. He stood there in silence, his own chest aching at the sight of the man he had devoted his life to finally breaking. 22 years. Dominic's voice was hoarse, trembling with each word. 22 years I searched for them. I searched for that woman. I searched for that little girl. And she's here. She's been mopping my floors every night beneath my feet. And I never saw her. He closed his fist tightly around the bracelets, then wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and drew in a slow breath. His voice lowered again, steadier but still shaking. Priest. He looked up. Priest stood straight. How did her mother, Helen Wren, die? Priest nodded and stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone to call his men outside. He needed information, and he needed it fast. 15 minutes later, Priest returned, and his face had changed. There was something in his eyes that Dominic had never seen in 20 years. Not fear, but hesitation. Priest didn't want to say what he was about to say. Boss. Dominic looked up. Speak. Priest drew in a breath. Helen Wren died on September 12th, 2007, at a free clinic in South Memphis. She was shot during a robbery. 2 men went in to steal medicine. She had no money, nothing valuable, but they shot her once in the chest. She died at the scene. Dominic listened in silence, his eyes never leaving Priest's face. Priest continued. The clinic was on Bellevue Street, at the corner of Walker. Dominic knew that place. He knew it very well. That area had once been territory, his territory, the ground he grew up on, the streets he fought for block by block when he was 16, 17, 18 years old, under Frank Moretti. Priest's voice lowered further. That robbery wasn't random, boss. The 2 men were members of the Moretti crew. Dominic felt the air leave his lungs. The Moretti crew was his crew. Not that he gave the order. Not that he held the gun. In 2007, he was 17 years old, busy building an empire, busy climbing to the top, busy becoming the Dominic Ashford. The world knew now. He hadn't known the robbery happened. He hadn't known Helen Wren died. He hadn't known anything. But it was the world he chose, the gang he belonged to, the system he fed from, slept under, killed for, and that system had killed Helen Wren, the only woman besides his mother who had ever knelt to save him when he was dying. Dominic sat there, his hands falling limp. The file slipped from his lap to the floor, the 2 braided bracelets rolled against his thigh. He picked them up and clenched them in his palm so tightly the thin threads nearly cut into his skin. He tried to breathe, but the air wouldn't fill his lungs. He tried to swallow, but his throat locked shut. The world he chose had killed the woman who saved his life. He lived because of Helen. Helen died because of his world. Helen's daughter lost her mother at 13, went into foster care, enlisted, lost her husband, raised a child alone, mopped the floors of his club every night, and had just taken a bullet for him. She saved him twice, once when she was 10 years old, holding his hand in an alley, once when she was 32, stepping between him and a bullet, and he was the reason her mother was gone. Dominic bent forward, his hands pressing against his temples, fingers digging into his hair, his head lowered almost to his knees. Priest stood there watching his boss and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. No words were enough. No words could reach the thing tearing Dominic apart from the inside. The silence stretched long. Only the steady beeping of the heart monitor filtered through the wall. Beep, beep, beep. Josie's heart was still beating. She was still alive. Dominic lifted his head. His eyes were red but dry now. The tears had stopped. He rose slowly and walked to the glass of the intensive care room and looked inside. Josie lay on a white hospital bed, wires across her body, an oxygen mask covering half her face. Her light brown hair spread across the pillow. Her face was peaceful, as if she were asleep, as if she knew nothing, as if she didn't know that the man standing on the other side of the glass was indirectly the reason her mother was no longer in this world. On her wrist was a faint mark where the braided bracelet had rested for 22 years. That bracelet was now in his hand, together with his own. 2 strands of thread, 1 pair, 2 lives twisted together by blood, by debt, by something Dominic didn't know how to name. Priest stepped up behind him. He wanted to say something, but Dominic spoke first. His voice was no longer cold, no longer steady. It was only the voice of a man carrying something heavier than any empire. I can repay her, Priest. I can pay her bills, buy her a house, give her anything she needs. But how do you repay a debt to someone who died because of your world? Priest didn't answer, because there was no answer. Dominic pressed his palm against the cold glass and looked at Josie lying inside, peaceful, unaware of the truth. The truth that the man standing here wanted to save her, but he was the reason she needed saving at all. 18 hours later, Josie opened her eyes. The hospital lights were stark white above her. She blinked several times. Everything was blurred at first, then slowly came into focus. The white ceiling, the tubes and wires, the steady beep of the heart monitor. She tried to move, and a sharp pain tore from her abdomen up into her chest. She let out a soft groan and turned her head, and she saw him, Dominic Ashford, sitting on a plastic chair beside her bed, dark circles under his eyes, hair disheveled, his suit still stained with dried blood. He hadn't changed his clothes. He hadn't left the chair for 18 hours. Josie looked at him, her vision still hazy, but she recognized that face. The scar along the bridge of his nose, the dark eyes, the last man she saw before everything went black. "You," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had just been removed. Then her eyes widened in sudden panic. She tried to sit up despite the searing pain. "My son, Benji. Where is my son? What time is it? The school play." Dominic stood quickly and placed a hand on her shoulder, gently. It was the first time in many years he had touched anyone with gentleness. "He's safe." His voice was lower, warmer than she had ever heard from anyone. "I sent someone to bring your neighbor and the boy here. He's sleeping in the waiting room. She's been with him all night." Josie exhaled and tears spilled down her face, not from pain but from relief. She fell back against the pillow and closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks as her breathing trembled. She pictured Benji in his small firefighter costume standing on stage, looking out at the empty row of seats where she wasn't. "My son, did you see the empty seat? Did you wait for me?" Dominic watched her cry. He stood there helpless. He knew how to command 100 men, but he didn't know how to comfort a woman crying for her child. He sat back down and waited in silence until she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at him. "Why are you here?" Dominic met her gaze. "I'm here because you're here because of me. Why did you save me? You know who I am. You know what I do." Josie looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes weren't afraid. They weren't angry, only tired. "I didn't save a Mafia boss. I saved a man who was about to be shot." Dominic tilted his head, not understanding. "You almost died. You have $200 in your account. You have a 7-year-old son waiting at home. You knew all of that and you still ran in. Why?" Josie looked up at the ceiling and was silent for a moment before she answered. "My husband died in Afghanistan in front of me. He was in my arms and I wasn't in time. I was a combat medic. I saved 2 men, but I couldn't save the one I loved most." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "For 40 minutes, I held my husband's body in the desert, and I swore I would never let that happen again to anyone if I could stop it." Silence settled between them. Dominic looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. Not at a janitor, not at a victim, but at a human being. a woman who had lost everything and still chose to save someone else. Inside him, he wanted to tell her about the bracelets, about the alley 22 years ago, about the 10-year-old girl who held his hand, about Helen, about all of it. But he couldn't, because if he told her about the bracelet, he would have to tell her the truth about her mother. And that truth would shatter this moment. It would shatter everything. So he swallowed it all, hid it behind his cold expression, hid it behind his dark eyes, and only said, "You have $200 in your account, a battlefield medal, and you're mopping my floors." "Medals don't pay rent," Josie replied without smiling. The hospital room door burst open, and a small boy shot inside like a bullet, brown curls, red eyes from crying. Benji ran straight to his mother's bed and climbed up to hug her. "Mom, you're hurt. You're hurt." Josie wrapped her arms around him, pressing against the wound despite the sharp pain, refusing to let go. She bit her lip and endured it. "I'm okay. I'm okay now." Benji cried into her neck, tears soaking the hospital gown. "Why didn't you come to my play? I waited for you." Josie choked on her words as tears flowed again. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Benji lifted his head, wiped his eyes, and looked around the room. He saw Dominic standing a step back near the door. A tall man in black, intimidating. But Benji wasn't afraid. He looked straight into Dominic's eyes with the clear gaze of a 7-year-old child. "Who are you?" Dominic looked at the boy and then did something he had never done before in front of anyone. He went down on one knee, lowering himself to the hospital floor so he was eye level with the child. "I'm the man your mother saved." Benji looked at his mother, then back at Dominic, and nodded solemnly. "My mom saves people all the time." Dominic swallowed hard. He glanced at Josie's wrist where the nurse had fastened the old braided bracelet back in place. The faded thread still there, still where it had been for 22 years. "I know," he said softly. "More than you think." Dominic repaid her in the only way he knew how, with money. He paid all of Josie's hospital bills without asking her. He sent men to the shabby apartment in South Memphis to repaint the walls, repair the heater, replace the windows and seal the drafts, install a new refrigerator, and fill it with food, all in a single day while she was still in the hospital. He sent her an envelope containing a new job offer, medical security manager at the Obsidian, salary 5 times higher, full insurance, a college fund for Benji. He thought that was enough. He thought money solved everything, because in his world, money always solved everything. But Josie wasn't from his world. 2 weeks after being discharged, her arm still bandaged, her abdomen still aching, Josie appeared at the Obsidian not to work but to see him. She walked straight upstairs, pushed open the office door, and stepped inside. Priest moved to block her, but Dominic lifted a hand and let her pass. Josie stood in front of his desk and threw the envelope down onto it. "I don't need your money." Dominic looked at her coldly. "You're refusing something other people would kneel to beg me for." "I'm not begging. I don't need it, and I don't want it." Her voice shook, not from fear, but from anger. "You think you pay my hospital bill, fix my house, offer me a job, and everything's finished. You think money erases debt. Don't use my son to buy your conscience." The words struck Dominic like a second bullet, one that didn't tear through his shoulder or abdomen but straight through a place he thought had died long ago. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. "Get out." His voice was colder than ever. Josie didn't step back. Then she turned and walked out, closing the door behind her. That night Dominic received word that a Southern contact had betrayed him, selling product to Victor Sheldon. He called Priest to handle it. Priest nodded without question. 2 hours later, Priest returned. "It's done." Dominic nodded, cold, ruthless, the old version of himself. He was still the monster, still Dominic Ashford. Nothing had changed. He sat in the car afterward and looked at his hands, clean, but he still saw blood, not the traitor's blood. Josie's blood on the floor of the Obsidian. He opened the car drawer and saw the 2 braided bracelets inside a small box. He looked at them, then closed it and drove away without looking back. 3 days later, Dominic drove to South Memphis alone. No priest, no guards. He drove past Josie's apartment just to look, just to know she was all right. He parked across the street and looked through the window. He saw Benji sitting alone on the apartment steps, legs swinging, holding crayons and drawing on a large sheet of paper spread across the concrete. Dominic meant to drive away, but the boy looked up and stared straight toward his car, as if he knew he was there. Dominic turned off the engine, stepped out, and crossed the street. Benji looked at him without fear, without surprise. "You came again." Dominic froze. "You saw me. I always see. Mom says you have to notice everything around you." Dominic looked down at Benji's drawing. 2 figures, one big, one small. The bigger one in gray clothes, the smaller one in white. Underneath, in childish letters, Mom and me. It was the same drawing as the one taped inside the janitor's locker. Dominic lowered himself to one knee, so he was eye level with the boy. "Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" The question was simple from the mouth of a 7-year-old, but it weighed more than any gun Dominic had ever held. "I don't know." Benji nodded. "That's okay. Mom says good people don't always know they're good." Dominic stayed there on one knee on the cracked concrete of a cheap apartment building, looking at a 7-year-old boy holding crayons, and he couldn't breathe because a child had just said what no one in the entire Memphis underworld would ever dare to tell him: the truth. Dominic stood, nodded to Benji, and turned away. He didn't look back, because if he did, he didn't know what would happen to him. That night, Josie returned to work at the Obsidian, her arm still wrapped, her abdomen still sore, because she needed money. At 2 a.m, she mopped the upper hallway near Dominic's office. She heard the piano as she did every night, a slow, sorrowful piece. But tonight she didn't keep walking. She stopped directly outside the door. Then the door opened. Dominic stood there looking at her. She looked back at him. Silence stretched between them. "What are you afraid of?" Dominic didn't answer. "I'm not afraid of anything. Then why do you play alone at 2 a.m? Dominic looked at her for a long time. Then he stepped back inside and closed the door without another word. And that night he didn't play the piano again, because someone had been listening. News of Josie saving Dominic spread quickly through the Memphis underworld. Not in newspapers, not online, but in whispered conversations between men who lived in shadows, and Victor Sheldon, 52 years old, the crime boss of East Memphis, heard everything. Victor wasn't like Dominic. He had no principles, no boundaries, nothing he wasn't willing to do to get what he wanted. And what he wanted was Dominic's territory. He had waited a long time, waited for Dominic to slip, and now he saw it. The weakness wasn't a crack in the empire. It wasn't a traitor in the ranks. The weakness was a cleaning woman and a 7-year-old boy. Victor had Josie followed for 2 straight weeks. Photographs of her taking Benji to school. Photographs of Benji playing in the schoolyard. Photographs of the apartment in South Memphis. Photographs of Mrs. Adler holding Benji's hand while buying him ice cream. Then he sent Dominic an envelope. Inside were 3 photographs. Benji smiling on a swing. Josie picking up her son at the school gate. Her apartment taken from across the street. And a small handwritten note in neat, elegant script. "Beautiful, isn't it? Such a shame." Dominic opened the envelope alone in his office. He looked at the 3 photographs, and his face drained of color. Not anger. Anger he was used to. This was fear. The greatest fear of his life. The fear he thought he had buried beneath 24 years of cold ruthlessness. The fear of someone else being harmed because of him, just as his mother Mary had been harmed because of his father. And now Josie and Benji were marked because of him. Dominic called Priest immediately. "Protect her and the boy 24 hours a day. They must not know." Priest nodded. And Victor, Dominic's jaw tightened, his eyes turning dark. "I'll handle him." He wanted to do it the old way, to give an order, to end Victor in the only language the underworld understood. But Priest shook his head. "Boss, Victor wants you to react. He wants you to strike first so he has an excuse to rally the Eastern Alliance. The harder you hit, the more danger she's in, because he'll know she matters to you." Dominic clenched his fists but said nothing, because Priest was right. 2 days later, Josie noticed a stranger near Benji's school, a man in a black jacket standing across the street watching the yard. 2 days in a row, same spot, same time. Josie's medic instincts snapped on immediately. She didn't call the police, because she knew the police couldn't help in this world. She sent Benji into class and took a bus straight to the Obsidian. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait. She pushed open Dominic's office door and stepped inside. Priest hadn't even reached her before she was standing in front of Dominic, her eyes burning. "Who is following my son?" Dominic looked at her. He had known she would notice sooner or later. She was a veteran medic. She had been trained to recognize surveillance. He could have lied, but he didn't. Not to her. Victor Sheldon. "My rival." He wants to use you and the boy to pressure me." Josie stood there listening, her blood turning cold, then hot, then cold again. She wanted to grab Benji and run far away, disappear. "Then let me and my son leave. We'll vanish." Dominic shook his head. "It's too late. Victor has marked you. If you disappear, he'll find you. And he doesn't have principles like I do." Josie sank into a chair, her legs trembling, though her eyes did not. Her eyes burned like fire. "Then what are you going to do?" "I'll handle it." Josie looked straight into him. "Handle it how?" "Kill him, then the next one, then the next after that." Silence filled the room. "If you truly want to protect us, then stop being the monster." Josie stood and walked to the door. "My husband died because of war. My mother died because of violence. I don't want my son growing up in a world where everything is solved with a gun." She stepped out and closed the door. Dominic remained seated alone in the dim office, and in his mind another woman's voice echoed, not Josie's, but his mother Mary's, gentle as it had been when she was alive. "Son, real strength isn't making people fear you. It's making them feel safe beside you." Dominic opened the drawer. The 2 braided bracelets lay there, 2 thin strands of faded thread, worn but unbroken. He lifted them and stared for a long time, and for the first time in 36 years, Dominic Ashford wondered if there was another way. Dominic sat in his office all night after Josie walked out, the 2 bracelets on the desk before him, his mother's words echoing in his mind and the question lingering, is there another way? He didn't sleep. He thought. He thought for a long time. The next morning he called Priest in and closed the door. "I need you to contact someone." Priest looked at him, waiting. "The FBI." Priest stood still, his expression unchanged, but his eyes flickered once, revealing surprise. "Boss, if you hand federal evidence on Victor over to them, Victor will fall, but they'll dig back into you too. The risk isn't just Victor, it's you." Dominic looked at him. "I know." Priest said nothing more, because he knew that once Dominic decided, no one could move him. 2 weeks later, through 3 layers of intermediaries, Dominic delivered to the FBI complete evidence of Victor Sheldon's weapons trafficking, money laundering, and violent extortion operations, enough to put Victor in prison for 30 years. On a Wednesday night, the FBI raided East Memphis. Victor was handcuffed in front of his men. He looked straight into a security camera before being pushed into the car, knowing exactly who had done this. The direct threat to Josie and Benji was eliminated, but Dominic knew the Underworld never forgave an informant. Rumors spread fast. Ashford cooperated with the feds. Ashford broke the code. The looks around him changed. The nods grew fewer. Men who once feared him began calculating. Dominic knew he had placed himself in danger, but he didn't regret it. Benji was safe. Josie was safe. That was enough. A week later, late at night, Josie came to the Obsidian. She wasn't wearing her gray uniform. She wore an old coat and carried a small bag. She had come to resign. She had come to say goodbye and leave Memphis to start over somewhere else. She had found a cheap rental in Nashville. She had registered Benji for a school transfer. She didn't want to stay here anymore. She didn't want any part of this world. She walked upstairs along the hallway she had once mopped every night and knocked on Dominic's office door. "Come in." Dominic sat behind his desk in dim light, a glass of whiskey untouched, and on the desk before him lay the 2 braided bracelets side by side. Josie stepped in, ready to say, "I'm here to resign," but the words died in her throat when her eyes fell on the bracelets. She froze. Her feet wouldn't move. Her heart stopped for a beat, then began racing wildly. She looked at the bracelet on the left, the one she knew, the one she had worn for 22 years, the one the nurse had removed before surgery and never returned to her. Then she looked at the one on the right, identical. Same braid, same faded color, same fragile thread. A pair. "That's my mother's bracelet," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dominic looked at her. He had waited for this moment. He had feared this moment. "No, that's yours." Josie stared at him, not understanding. He drew a breath and began. 22 years ago, I was 14. I was stabbed in an alley in South Memphis. I was dying. A woman ran to me and knelt down and pressed her hand against my wound to keep me alive. Beside her was a little girl about 10 years old, with light brown hair and blue-gray eyes. She held my hand and said, "Don't be afraid. My mom will save you." Josie couldn't breathe. He continued. "When the ambulance arrived, The bracelet slipped from the little girl's wrist into my hand. I kept it for 22 years. I didn't know their names. I searched for them for 22 years. That woman was your mother, Helen Wren, and that little girl was you, Josie. Josie cried without sound, tears streaming down her face, because every thread had just been tied back together, because 22 years suddenly had meaning, because the bracelet she thought her grandmother had given her mother was not from a grandmother at all, but made by her mother as a pair for the two of them, and one had been in Dominic's hand for 22 years. But Dominic hadn't finished. He had to tell her the rest. He owed her the truth. Josie, your mother died in 2007. She was shot at the free clinic. The robbery was carried out by the gang I belonged to. I didn't give the order, but it was the world I chose. I lived off money stained with that blood, and that world killed the woman who saved my life. Silence. Long silence. Only Josie's heavy breathing filled the room. Tears still fell, but now they were different. No longer astonishment, but pure pain. She rose slowly without looking at him and turned toward the door. Dominic didn't reach for her, didn't stop her, didn't beg. He only said, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you deserve to know that everything I've done since you took that bullet for me wasn't repayment. It was debt. A debt to your mother. A debt to you. A debt to the 10-year-old girl who held my hand when no one else would even look at me." Josie stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, not turning back, tears falling onto the floor. I stepped in front of that bullet before I knew any of this. The answer is in that. She opened the door and walked out. Dominic remained seated alone, the two bracelets on the desk, the whiskey untouched, the light dim, and for the first time in his life, Dominic Ashford didn't know what he was supposed to do next. 1 year later, at 2 a.m, the emergency room of a public hospital in Memphis glowed under harsh white neon lights, thick with the smell of antiseptic, the sound of machines beeping, people groaning, stretcher wheels rattling across the floor. Josie Wren stood in the middle of it all wearing blue scrubs, her hair tied high, white gloves on her hands. The hands that once gripped a mop handle now held scissors cutting gauze, a stethoscope, a syringe. She had renewed her nursing license herself with a scholarship for veterans. She had searched for the information, filled out the forms, submitted the applications, attended the interviews. No one helped her. No one asked on her behalf. She did it all alone because she was Josie Wren, and she didn't need anyone to save her. She saved herself. The emergency room doors burst open, and 2 paramedics rushed in pushing a stretcher. On it lay a teenage boy about 14 or 15, dark-skinned, short hair, face bruised and bloody, eyes closed, t-shirt torn, red spreading across his abdomen, stab wound. The attending physician shouted for Josie. She ran to the stretcher and looked down at the boy, and for a moment another image overlaid the one before her. She saw a 14-year-old child lying in a South Memphis alley 23 years earlier, back against brick, blood slipping through his fingers, her mother kneeling beside him. Then the vision dissolved, and Josie was here in a public hospital in Memphis at 2 a.m, and she had work to do. She pressed her hand firmly against the wound. Exact placement, exact pressure, just as her mother had done in that alley, just as she had done on the battlefield, just as she had done on the floor of the Obsidian, pressing her own wound while waiting for the ambulance. She worked calmly, professionally, quickly. No trembling, no panic. The PTSD was still there. The nightmares still came. But her hands no longer shook when holding steel. Her hands were steady because this was who she was. This was what her mother had placed in her blood. She saved people. 30 minutes later, the boy was stabilized. The blade had missed vital organs. He would live. Josie stepped into the hallway and sat on a plastic chair, leaning back against the wall, closing her eyes and exhaling slowly. She looked down at her hands after removing the gloves. Blood stained her fingers, bright red beneath her nails and in the creases of her skin. But this time was different. This wasn't Ryan's blood soaking into her uniform in the desert. It wasn't her own blood spreading across the black stone floor of the Obsidian. This was blood she chose to touch. Blood she reached for willingly because she was a nurse. Because this was what she had been born to do. She looked at her hands, and she smiled. Truly smiled. For the first time in a long while. She smiled because she knew she was finally where she belonged. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. It rang twice. A small, sleepy voice answered. "Mom, aren't you asleep?" "No, I'm waiting for you." Josie smiled. her eyes wet. I love you. I love you too. Did you save anyone tonight? I saved someone. A boy. Like Grandma once saved. Benji was quiet for a moment, then said, Grandma must be happy. Josie swallowed hard. I think so. Benji was 8 now, taller, still asking questions that tightened his mother's throat. The week before, he had written an essay at school titled, The Person I Admire Most. Benji wrote about his mother in still clumsy handwriting. My mom used to be a soldier. She saved people on the battlefield. She was hurt, but she didn't quit. She mopped floors to raise me. She took a bullet to save a stranger. And now she is a nurse. She saves people every night. She is the strongest person I know. The teacher read the essay aloud to the class and cried. In another part of Memphis, the Obsidian still lit up every night, but it was changing. Slowly, painfully, dangerously. Dominic was withdrawing from violent operations piece by piece, shifting toward legitimate business. Many men wanted him dead for that, because in the Underworld, change meant weakness, and weakness meant death. But Dominic didn't stop. He established a foundation, not in his name, not in Josie's, but in the name Helen Wren. The Helen Wren Foundation funded a free clinic in South Memphis, in the very neighborhood where Helen had once worked, the very neighborhood where she had died, the very neighborhood where she had saved him in an alley 23 years earlier. The new clinic was clean, brightly lit, fully supplied with medicine and equipment, staffed with doctors and nurses every day, free to anyone who walked through the door. Dominic didn't tell Josie. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't seek her out once in that year. Priest asked him why he didn't let her know. Dominic sat in his office, the 2 braided bracelets still resting on his desk, and looked at them for a long time. Because it isn't for her to know, Priest. It's for her mother. On a winter night in Memphis, the cold cut against the skin, the sky black without stars, only the sickly yellow of streetlights, and the white breath forming in the air as Josie exhaled. She had just finished her night shift at the hospital, 3 a.m, her old coat zipped to her throat, hands tucked into her pockets. She walked home as she did every night along the familiar road through South Memphis, past corners she had known since childhood, past the places her mother once led her each evening. Then she stopped. Her feet stopped before her mind gave the order, because her eyes saw something that had not been there a year ago. A small building glowing warmly, white painted walls clean and bright, glass doors clear. Inside there were chairs, medical equipment, gentle lighting, and on the sign outside in clear, dignified letters, Helen Wren Clinic, free care for the community. Josie stood on the cold sidewalk staring at her mother's name, illuminated in the winter night, and tears came immediately, without reason, without thought, because the 3 words Helen Wren were shining in the darkness of Memphis, in the very neighborhood where her mother had lived, where she had worked, where she had died. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was warm, clean, faintly scented with antiseptic like her mother's old clinic, but newer, better, complete. Examination beds, stocked cabinets, blood pressure monitors, everything her mother's clinic had never had. On the wall near the entrance hung a photograph of Helen Wren, brown hair, gentle, warm smile, an old picture enlarged and carefully framed, and beneath it, in bold black handwriting, she recognized, "For the woman who saved my life when I did not deserve it, and for her daughter who did it again." Josie lifted her hand and touched the glass over her mother's face, her fingers trembling. She cried, but this time the tears were softer, warmer, as if her mother were standing somewhere in the room smiling. She stood there for a long time, then wiped her eyes and stepped back out into the cold. She knew where she needed to go. She didn't know why she knew, but her feet carried her there. The South Memphis alley, where it had all begun 23 years earlier, where her mother had knelt beside a bleeding child, where she at 10 years old had held the hand of a stranger and said, "Don't be afraid." Dominic stood there with his hands in the pockets of his coat, looking at the old brick wall where he had once lain bleeding and close to death. He stood there alone in the winter night, as if he had known she would come, or as if he came there every night. Josie stopped a few steps away. She didn't speak. He didn't speak. They stood in the cold alley in silence for a long time, with only the sound of wind and breath between them. "The clinic is beautiful," Josie said first, her voice gentle. "Your mother deserved it," Dominic replied without looking at her. "You deserve it too," she said. He turned to look at her. "At least the part of you that's trying to change." Silence again. Dominic asked softly, as if afraid of the answer, "Have you forgiven me?" Josie looked at him for a long time, straight into his dark eyes marked by the faint scar across his nose, the eyes of the 14-year-old boy whose hand she once held. "No," she said honestly. "Maybe it will take a long time." Dominic nodded slowly. "I can wait." Josie looked down at her wrist where the braided bracelet had rested again after she reclaimed it from the hospital. She had worn it all year as she had for the 22 before, but now she slipped it off carefully, gently easing each finger beneath the fragile thread and lifting it free. She held the bracelet in her palm, then placed it into Dominic's hand. "Keep them both," she said, "until you become the man my mother believed you could be." Dominic closed his fingers around the bracelet. The two bracelets now lay together in his palm after 23 years. His hand trembled, but he held them tight. Josie looked at him one last time in the winter night, then turned and walked away toward the streetlight at the end of the alley, her figure growing smaller, old coat wrapped around her, brown hair lifted by the cold wind. She didn't look back. Dominic stood there watching her go, then looked down at the old brick wall where he had once bled 23 years earlier. He opened his palm. The two braided bracelets lay side by side, worn, faded, fragile as if a strong wind could carry them away, yet unbroken. Through 23 years of fire, blood, war, loss, death, betrayal, the thin threads had not snapped. My mother used to say, "Don't look at who someone is. Look at who they are trying to become." I once thought a hero was someone with medals, someone known by everyone, but my son taught me differently. A hero is someone who shows up every day and does the right thing, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching. Because someone is always watching, and someone is always worth saving. Piano music rose slowly, the sorrowful piece Dominic used to play at 2 a.m, but now it sounded different, no longer sad but warm, like two fragile threads refusing to break. This story is a reminder that sometimes the strongest people are the most invisible in our lives. The janitor, the single mother, the veteran, they fight every day, not on battlefields but in ordinary life, and they deserve to be seen, respected, loved. If this story touched your heart, please like to show your support, share this video with the people you love, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you meaningful stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever met quiet heroes in your own life? Share with us in the comments below. We would truly love to hear what's in your heart. Wishing all of you watching this good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.